Special thanks to Sega and Atlus for providing me with this DLC. Episode Aigis was originally an extra campaign that was added in Persona 3 FES the year after Persona 3's initial release. This would be dubbed in the West as The Answer, but I personally always just called it Episode Aigis. It's the same thing, really. This expansion would become controversial amongst fans for many reasons that I've already gone into detail about in another video. So I'm just gonna assume all of you watching this just get what I'm saying. Go watch my original video if you don't. Shortly after the release of Persona 3 Reload, Atlus would announce a DLC that would recreate this very expansion in an effort to have a fully complete remake of Persona 3 FES. This would introduce a whole new wave of controversy, and it's not just a one-note issue. This issue has layers to it, some pertaining to the game itself, and some pertaining to the discussion around it. Now, I've been keeping up with interviews for Reload ever since it was announced, and that remained the same throughout the period between then and the release of Episode Aigis. Never before have I ever seen so many red flags about a game before it came out. But now that I've actually played the game, I can actually see if those concerns were warranted or not. I've already expressed my feelings on the story of Episode Aigis in my original video, so for the most part in this video, I'll be committing the unforgivable crime of comparing how well it holds up to the original, and how faithfully it was recreated. You know, the works. Obviously spoilers for all versions of Persona 3 are still gonna be fair game, but wait, what does that have to do with the discourse around this game? That's the thing. Every single criticism towards this game is apparently controversial, or rather, it has its own little subsect of controversy, like I can't even begin to explain. It's not just external factors like the price point or the reasons behind not recreating the female protagonist scenario. If you thought the discussion surrounding the infamous epilogue of Persona 3 was bad before, you ain't seen nothing yet. Before I get into any of the negative stuff, I want to give credit where credit is due. The two positive things that I will say about the Episode Aigis DLC are A, the inclusion of the Persona Compendium, and B, the equipment system. The first one is pretty self-explanatory. While the lack of a compendium wasn't a deal breaker for me in the original, this is one of those choices that I think is just for the better. Though I'm not sure how much credit that really deserves considering they're adding back something that shouldn't have been removed in the first place. Second is something personal to me. I've always liked the idea of equipment having a whole range of random effects. It allows the player to weigh the decision between two pieces of equipment outside of just the numbers attached to it. This is something I enjoyed about the original Persona 3 and even other RPGs, and I'm glad that it was brought back here. While these things do vaguely exist in Persona 4 and 5, it wasn't nearly as substantial. You could get away with just going with the bigger numbers and not noticing a huge difference at all. That's about where all the positives end. No, I'm not joking. So P Studio was very aware of how controversial the original release of Episode Aigis was. One interview, the director stated that one of the biggest complaints they wanted to address was the difficulty. You guys know exactly where this is going. The addition of direct commands for party members alone should have been enough to remedy this for most people. Most of the difficulty originally came from figuring out how to efficiently use the tactics for more diverse enemy groups. Was there really a need to nerf things even further? Just like the base game, I played on the hardest difficulty. The root of the problem is all the same. While the beginning of the game feels fine, it starts to fall apart once you gain access to party characteristics and some of the better physical skills. Theurgy spam is also still an issue, of course, but now it's even more apparent than ever. Now, if the response to base reloads balancing is anything to go off of, you already know that people are not responding well to the criticism here either. Before we get into all that, let's look at what episode Aigis does differently. Something new Reload does for episode Aigis is a reworking of the monad doors. While before it was just one door with a single strong enemy guarding prizes, you now have the option to pick one of 3 doors. The left being the easy option with the least rewards, the middle one being the medium option, and the right being the hard option with the most rewards. In principle, this sounds like a good way to incentivize the player to challenge themselves with the possibility of a bigger payoff. Ironically though, this ends up having just the opposite effect. These guys give hella XP, and for the most part, you're gonna be fighting the same enemies for the entire block of the Abyss of Time you're on, over and over and over. And these doors get progressively easier as you keep doing them. I know the knee-jerk response to this will be, just ignore them then, but there's literally no reason not to open every door. Especially when the game gives you an easy option. You'd just be passing up free stuff at that point. Some of the best equipment is locked behind these doors, and in a game where character speccing is the best part, it is really not in your best interest to ignore this stuff. It's also just kind of ridiculous how I have to avoid the thing that was meant to make the game challenging because it inadvertently made the game easier. It's kinda sad too, because you can tell they really wanted this to be an interesting challenge. If you look at some of these group boss stats, you can tell one enemy is supposed to cover for its partner, or the other. The enemy design follows the same principle as the original game, but you wanna know the difference? You didn't have crazy powerful shit just to bypass all the boss gimmicks. I beat the Shadow of Doubt before he could even copy all of my party's personas. Oh, let me guess, I should just ignore all that stuff too? I understand most casual players playing on normal mode aren't really gonna care about this stuff, but when someone chooses the hardest difficulty, I don't think it's unfair to complain that they didn't get what they were promised. Most responses to criticism are very hand-wavy and dismissive, without much actual substance or counter-argument. Like, you could literally post a clip of yourself breaking the game wide open, and people will still tell you it's harder than the base game, or that the original was just as easy. That is just false. Not too long ago, I played Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance. While that game does also give you very powerful tools at your disposal, those things required way more conditions and strategies to even use. Some Magatsuhi skills were limited to a specific race of demons, and they offer a much wider variety of effects. Unlike Reload's theurgy mechanic, you only have one bar for the entire party, so there was more weight on the decision of when to use it. I thought Vengeance was just the right amount of challenge for me personally. Sure, I'd get stuck at certain spots for a little bit, and that might be inconvenient for someone like me who needs to get content out for these games. But sometimes, stuff like this is a good reminder for me to slow down and take my time to enjoy these games. Maybe work on other projects on the side instead of putting all my eggs into one basket. The only story fights I thought were decent were the Siege member fights. While it is still very possible to cheese these fights, there's more room for the opponents to demonstrate their synergy, which is fun. These are only really better in that you don't have your full roster of monstrous party members to spam all their theurgy attacks at once on. It's only loosely challenging because party members are too powerful, and you don't have any of them now. Except for Metis the Menace over here, who you have for the entire game, by the way. The final boss is just a joke, by the way. Really a letdown after finally getting some decent fights. So all the good fights in this game are endgame level bosses, and that's not even getting into the challenge battles. I haven't done them yet myself, but I will say, it's both hilarious and kinda concerning that it took a Joker cameo for them to finally put their whole ass into a boss fight. Most other gameplay changes are pretty minuscule. Skill card duplication now costs 1 Twilight Shard per card. So basically nothing. You can still heal at the clock for Twilight Shards too, but that's basically pointless since you can just go back to the dorm, which heals you for free. Sure, it regenerates the randomized dungeons and you lose your Arcana Burst cards, but It's honestly not a huge deal. I didn't find myself relying on them too much in episode Aigis anyway. The biggest oddity that all of my friends and I were puzzled by was the way the game handles unlocking your character's second theurgies. After you finish a block of the Abyss, the game seems to randomly choose 2 characters to regain their second theurgy attacks. I got Junpei and Mitsuru first, while someone else I talked with got Akihiko and Koromaru first. On one hand, I find this interesting. Perhaps this is the game's way of encouraging the player to try out different party compositions, although the original did that just fine using the boss design. Oh wait. On the other hand, this can really screw with people, because maybe the character they want to use doesn't get theirs until near the end of their playthrough. Imagine how the speedrunning scene is gonna react to this. If they don't get divine intervention after the first block, the run is dead. Speaking of theurgies and characteristics, let's talk about hangout events. On every boss floor, you'll be rewarded with treasure. Some of these can be mundane equipment, while others can be key items to unlock special events with your allies. Every character has 2, and this is how you acquire characteristics for your party members. When they first announced these new social events at the dorm, I thought it was the goofiest thing ever. Isn't the implication that these characters drifted apart after the protagonist's death, but now they're just being chummy as if nothing happened? It's such a weird dissonance from the rest of the game. Given the dire situation they're in and how desperately they want to escape, I have a hard time believing they'd sit down and just watch a movie. Why did we just pick up a math book in the dungeon and start solving equations? That's not even their homework, they're just doing math problems for fun. Meanwhile, the main story rolls with the estrangement narrative and has the characters opening up about their past trauma. You can actually see them slowly getting comfortable with each other again. I get the idea is to break up the dungeon crawling segments to make up for the lack of social sim elements, but this seems to lean into the socializing thing a little too much. I think I would have just preferred if the characters sat down and had a serious conversation with Aigis. Let them vent about their current situation and give some insight on how they're coping with the protagonist's death. If the idea is that these characters need a break from all the non-stop dungeon crawling, have them actually give off the impression that this infinite time loop situation is taking a toll on them. They're used to fighting for 1 hour at night tops. It's never explicitly stated how many day cycles they spent in this time loop. Maybe they could have expanded on that more. This one's not as controversial as some of the other things I'll talk about in this video. I just think it's funny how when this feature was hinted at in an interview, people insisted to me that these wouldn't just be the same thing as dorm activities in the base game. But then the trailer came out and it turned out that they are. Alright, so this next point was actually quite contentious when I live streamed the first few hours of this game. So yeah, the cutscenes. In the base game, it was more a matter of me disagreeing with the direction of certain scenes. Here though, it just got worse. Like, the scenes just straight up look bad now. Sure, the characters are more on model, comparatively speaking, but the angles and lack of camera movement make a lot of the shots look flat. And this problem becomes apparent as soon as the first cutscene. I'm starting to notice a pattern here. You know it's bad when newcomers of the game can't even tell that the characters are fighting each other?
That kinda hurts me. They're here training.
We sparring with each other? Jesus.
Damn! Oh, they're training.
I'm guessing they're like training each other, they're not actually like fighting.
Now, I'm not trying to make fun of these people, it's not their fault. I'm just trying to prove a point that this scene is not getting the message across effectively. In the original scene, you could see the murderous intent in their eyes. Akihiko just barely dodges Aigis' bullets. I understand the reason for their fighting was really contrived to begin with, but this is something the game clearly wants us to take seriously. So from a setup standpoint, Fess's introductory scene does a better job in my opinion. The meta scene is one that I saw people complaining about before I even started playing it. I avoided watching it until I got to play the game for myself, and yeah, it just doesn't hit nearly as hard. The one detail I like is how Junpei and Mitsuru actually jump to Ken's defense after Aigis is knocked down, but everything else just feels limp. There's not as much punch behind Aigis or Metis' actions, the audio doesn't have as much impact, the situation felt a lot more urgent in the original scene, where you see everything from Aigis' perspective. You can visually and auditorily perceive that Aigis' vitals are barely holding out. Her eyes dilate as she flashes back to the protagonist's death. And once again, Orpheus' appearance in Reload is a lot more glamorous than it originally was. You actually got to see Athena morph into Orpheus before, while here you just see Athena disappear with Orpheus taking her place. You finally get to see Aigis' visuals cut off, but at the very end. However, she very daintily falls to the ground now instead of collapsing outright. It just doesn't pack as hard of a punch. There might be more little details in this scene I could get into, but those are the most apparently noticeable. Besides, people are just gonna call this a nitpick anyway. The worst offender is the Shadow of Doubt scene. After defeating the embodiment of their regrets, the protagonist-shaped figure disintegrates in front of them with this ominous music, all the way down to his flesh and bones. And at the very end, you get a glimpse of him smiling, that you've finally moved past those regrets. Here, he just turns into pixie dust, and Aigis does that cheesy-ass thing they do in anime where she reaches out to him as he disappears with the somber track in the background. I know this scene in particular is kinda subjective. Some people might prefer the sappy direction over the shocking and unsettling one, but I don't think any of these other scenes can be excused. I feel like even someone who hasn't played Fess first could see these problems. I have friends who are avid anime watchers. Whenever we watch shit together, they're constantly pointing out these types of oddities all the time. If there was ever any evidence that they just barely had the time and budget for this DLC, it's definitely in the cutscenes. But absolutely nothing could compare to the discourse surrounding the Seas conflict. There was one article in particular that had me raising my eyebrow. When an interviewer asked about what revisiting Fess's themes of grief was like, Kazuhisa Wada then turned the question back around on them, and made it a huge point to let everyone know that they made changes to certain controversial parts of the story.
We have tried to make a few adjustments to the game in order to help players better understand these themes. We looked back at the scenario and analyzed the various opinions of fans at the time and picked out the parts of the scenario that were controversial outside of the main plot.
I think everyone's minds jumped to the same conclusion when we read that. They were going to dial back the hostility in a noticeable way at the least. My prediction was pretty accurate. It almost kind of feels like they didn't trust the player base to understand the Seas conflict. The tone feels very different. It goes from feeling like an actual fight to a mild debate team skirmish. I've seen people write this off as a dub direction thing, and some have even claimed that this is more accurate to the original Japanese dialogue of Fess. Okay, I'm calling BS. That cannot be the case. Hell, some of their reasoning for their parts in this fight just straight up feel different than before. And whenever you ask the people making these claims for some comparisons or to cite their sources, radio silence. So it looks like someone else is gonna have to pick up the slack and take on the burden of proof for them. Oh wait, I don't know Japanese. That's okay though. I know just the guy to ask for help on this matter.
No, I don't care about your stupid discourse, and I'm not about to sit here on my ass translating a game that's already been translated. I have a life. I have Giten Megami Tenseis to play that no one else will.
Aw, Marshall, come on please. If I don't disprove these randos online talking out of their ass after calling them liars, I'll get called a fake fan. Is that what you want?
Listen, I'm going to tell everybody that you haven't played Shin Megami Tensei 9 blindfolded yet, and when they find out, it's not going to be good.
Oh, you're gonna hit me with that now? Well, I'm gonna tell the internet that you've never finished Persona 1 or 2. Alright, so here's what I was able to get out of him. So something we both took notice of is that none of the people making these claims know Japanese.
But an unexpected surprise. And by unexpected, I mean completely expected!
First of all, as we've established earlier, Wada straight up said they were going to change stuff. So if people are noticing a difference in the story, that's probably because it was meant to be different. Arguing that it's not just kinda shows you don't even have your bases covered. While yes, there are some insignificant differences that are technically more accurate in the base game, I really did not find anything like that when looking into this myth for episode Aigis in particular. I ran this shit through Google Translate, and even though the translation was booty cheeks, I could tell the overall message was exactly the same as the English in Fess. I then ran the same Japanese dialogue by Marsh to make sure no crucial details got lost in translation on my part. There were none, but I think I might have gotten Marsh into Japanese Let's Plays. What we can both confirm though is that Reload definitely adds lines that didn't exist before in either language, like Yukari going, "This is just my opinion." Then why fight? We don't have enough time to argue? Damn, maybe if we didn't waste our time on that Shrek movie marathon, this wouldn't be an issue.
Hey Junpei, you see that donkey? That's you.
Oh, well, wait. Wouldn't that make you the ogre then? Yukari doesn't even put up any resistance after you defeat her like in the original, she just immediately breaks down. Mitsuru does not even make an effort to play devil's advocate in Reload. They also made her reason for taking Yukari's side less personal towards her. There's more emphasis on the promise Mitsuru made to herself than wanting to be there for Yukari the way she was there for Mitsuru. Mitsuru backpedals her statement going from I to we want to be there for you. I also just don't really get the impression that Yukari liked the protagonist as much as she did in the original. It low-key feels like they were trying to make this scene less ship-coded. I know some people take issue with the idea of these games favoring one girl over the others, but I've personally never seen it that way. Like, come on guys, it's okay for a girl to be canonically into the protagonist, especially when he doesn't even have to like her too for that to be the case. If you've seen my last Reload video, you'd know that Yukari's not even my favorite pairing with the protagonist, and I don't really have an issue with it at all. Hell, isn't a big part of Yukari's deal in episode Aigis that she's jealous of how close Aigis was with the protagonist? Oh god, what are they gonna do with Rise when they remake Persona 4? Junpei's position also feels way more flimsy in Reload. In Fess, he stresses that he doesn't want to force everyone to go along with such a big decision if not everyone's going to be happy with it. He doesn't want anyone to have any regrets with the outcome. In Reload, he's just like, I don't know. And no, the high tensions were not a result of Fess's dub direction. Just listening to the scenes in Japanese should make that clear.
それはつまり自分には受け止める力がないと認めるってことか。あれだけの1年間を過ごしてお前は自分との勝負に負けて終わりか。
そっちこそ綺麗事なんじゃないですか。心から大事なら純粋に救おうって思うのが本当でしょ。過去をやり直せるんですよ。こんなチャンス手放すなんて先輩こそ本気なの。
じゃあ聞くな。お前はもし俺がお前の父親の死を帳消しにしたいと言ったら同意するのか。シンジやミキの死が帳消しになるとしたって俺は断固拒否する。無駄な過去なんてない。それ以外は全て言い訳だ。
Even the Japanese fans are pointing out differences in the dialogue. Look bruh, I get the changes I've covered so far might not mean a whole lot to some people, and that's completely fine. If you like everything the way it is, I have nothing against that, really. I absolutely do not condone dunking on people for saying they enjoy Persona 3 Reload and its DLC in any capacity. Let's all be decent human beings, please. But if it's gotten to the point where people are straight up telling lies and spreading misinformation to defend Reload, I think it goes without saying that this is getting out of hand. When I disagreed with certain choices in base Reload, I was at the very least able to make peace with it. With episode Aigis, all those problems just got worse. To be honest, I kinda saw it all coming anyway. That's pretty much the extent of what I have to say on that front. The fact that every single one of these things I mentioned in this video is some point of contention should be a clue that there's a huge unwillingness to have a real conversation about this game. This isn't some hate-fueled rant meant to own the Reload fans. I've discussed Persona 3 Reload with people who prefer FES, I've discussed with people who prefer Reload, and I've discussed with people who like both of them equally for totally different reasons. Don't jump into these conversations guns blazing, assuming everyone disagreeing with you is trying to be hostile or antagonize you. Sure, on the internet, a lot of people are just like that. It sucks. I know just as well as you what it's like for people to completely dismiss your opinions regardless of your reasoning or how accepting you are to disagreeing with other people peacefully. But understand that not everything is a personal attack on you. This goes for everyone whether you enjoy FES more or Reload more. From my perspective though, fans of the original have been hearing the same criticisms for years now. I've already made peace with it. I made my statements and I put it to rest. While there are plenty of people who over-attach themselves to the original, Reload hasn't even been out for a year yet, and people have already gotten this defensive over it. And the catch-all response will always be nostalgia blindness. Persona has been constantly present in my life ever since I started playing these games and making videos on them. They never left my life. I feel more nostalgia for watching my friends play Kingdom Hearts for the first time. And dismissing people's issues with a remake as nostalgia blindness is literally no different than FES fans telling newer fans that they should just get good. Despite how well loved Persona 3 is, it has always had its controversies. It drastically changed the series forever, it's fought over the spotlight with its successor Persona 4, post-Persona 5 it got shat on by fans of both older and newer titles for very different reasons. And now there are multiple versions of Persona 3 that people just can't let coexist for some reason. Don't bother with these other games because they don't lay a finger on Reload. I guess the biggest takeaway here is that Persona 3 and mostly episode Aigis will never not be controversial. Not 17 years ago, and not today either. History repeats itself. I used to think remakes should strive to be as faithful as possible because the types of remakes that I personally have experience with were just that. But after experiencing Persona 3 Reload in its entirety, I think my mindset has changed. While faithful remakes do exist, and I very much welcome them, they're a lot harder to make nowadays. Or rather, it's a lot harder to fully commit to a truly faithful remake. They have a lot more to live up to. You know it's bad when the devs are literally arguing over preserving features to keep the spirit of the original game. I'm also just really sick of this toxic mindset where we must replace the original with a definitive version. Nowadays, I think remakes should just try to take on their own identity, and game companies should just preserve the originals in any way possible. Maybe a Persona Classics collection one day, but that sounds like nothing more than a pipe dream right now. Thank you all for watching. Before I end the video, I have a short announcement. I revived my old Ko-fi account, so if you'd rather give a one-time donation than commit to a monthly Patreon membership, you can. That's all. I'll see you again soon, hopefully.